Hello and welcome to day 8 / part 8 of 28 Days to Better Chess Tactics. Today we're going to look at the tactical motif removal of the guard. Now for this lesson, I'm just going to go through the initial position and then 3 practice positions, trying to make it more concise, but also because these positions are quite representative of the tactic. Alright, so in this position, it's white to move, and if you want to pause it, you can do that now. But we're going to go through it here. Alright, so with white to move, first we'll notice that black is threatening the queen, as well as, well, it looks like the queen's protecting the knight, but he's putting a lot of pressure on the king side. But if we look at our moves, we can see that we can stretch black's defenses quite thin. We have the weakened dark squares here with pretty much a weak back rank with the king not being defended, and the heavy pieces, both the rook and the queen, are over on the queen side. Alright, so first we'll look for all the forcing moves, the checks, captures, and threats. With the king, with our white king, we don't really have anything. With the queen, we do have a few moves, but they're kind of ridiculous, such as queen takes rook. So we also have queen takes queen, but that's just a trade. And so pretty much we're left with the rook or the knight. We can see that the knight doesn't really have any forcing moves. The knight can't move because it's defending the rook as well. And with the rook, we have the check here. So we'll need to look at that. Pawn moves, we do have a move here. And this doesn't really solve anything. The knight could just take. Alright, so if we look at rook check, we could see that the rook can take, but that removes the guard of the queen because the rook's protecting the queen. So if we move the rook forward and the rook takes, then we just win the queen. And actually it's forced because the white queen is covering all the dark squares, and there's no other piece to interpose. So that's the final variation there. Of course, we'll do a blunder check. With these kind of tactics, you always want to do a blunder check because you want to make sure that there's no end move. So what I do is I always look at the end of this variation plus 1 move extra. So you look at what forcing moves black has, and sometimes there's an extra move that you'll miss that wins material back. In this position, there is not one, but you always want to make sure. Alright, we're going to start with position 1. In this position, it is white to move, and you can pause the video now. Alright, so looking at this position, we can see that black can take this rook if it was his move. But you should also notice black's weakened king position. He has these pawn islands sitting here, so some weakened pawns. And we also have a check with the queen here or here. So we'll evaluate the candidates. With the king, there's nothing. The pawn, there's really nothing. So we're left with the queen and the rook here. The queen, as we said, can check here or here, as well as rook takes. Rook takes here. So we'll evaluate those 3 candidate moves here. Of course, when you're evaluating candidate moves, you want to look at the most forward. So we'll look at queen first here. We can see that the king can move here or here, but that doesn't really solve anything. It doesn't lead to any advantage necessarily. Of course, we can have a perpetual, such as here, and then we'll just keep checking the king. But we want something a little more. All right, so then we'll look at this, and we'll see that not only are we checking the king, but we're hitting the queen. So if we visualize this position, we see that the queen has to take, because if the king moves, then we'll just win the queen. So we see if the queen takes, this pawn can still take, but we have an in-between move after the removal of the guard. So the queen has been taken away from this square to protect the rook, and now we take with check. So the king has to move, and we've just won a rook. So we win a rook in that variation. We'll also want to look at rook takes. So if rook takes, well, the queen just takes, and that doesn't really lead to anything. Yeah, we can maybe win a pawn, but black could win it back coming in here. And of course, we're going to go for the rook. So, as I said in the previous position, you want to always try to look for one move further in these kinds of tactics. After we take, we see that it's pretty clear cut that we've won a rook and that we can move on to position 2. Alright, in position 2, it is white to move, and you can pause the video now. Alright, so seeing here, we can evaluate that material is pretty much equal for both black and white, but we should notice the elements, such as the rook undefended here, as well as the queen and this rook are on the same diagonal. So once we notice that, we can start looking for forcing candidate moves to undermine the queen, protecting it. Because we know that if we take here, that will be forking the king and this undefended rook. So if we remove the guard of that rook, we should look for moves that do that. We can evaluate bishop takes, rook here, and those are pretty much our only two candidates if we understand the elements of the position. Moves such as pawn up, those would be a normal move in this kind of position. Bringing the rook in or bringing the rook up to try to double rooks, that would be an idea. But in moves where you notice weaknesses, you want to look for forcing variations, and that'll cut down your work a lot, actually. Alright, so let's evaluate rook here first, because that's the most forcing. And pretty much the queen has to take. If the queen moves here or here, then either way, we'll win this rook. So if we bring the rook in and the queen takes, then we take the rook on d5 with check. And either way, we're going to win a rook for nothing. So we've evaluated that as winning. We should still look at bishop takes just really quickly here. And now the queen could take, but he's not going to make that mistake. The knight would just take. And for example, if we try to gang up on this, then either the rook could still take, and even if we took back or took here, then he'd still have a rook into the game, or the rook can come over here, and that reinforces the rook on d5 as well as relieves the pin. So bishop takes knight is not a good move, doesn't lead to anything. So we've decided on rook to e7, and we should do a blunder check. So after we've taken, we'll evaluate at the end of the line, and we see that there's really no forcing moves because the queen has to come down. And after we trade queens, then it's a very simple n1 endgame. Alright, moving on to position 3. In this position, it is black to move, and you can pause the video now. Okay, so in this position, you can see that you'll notice that the rooks are contesting the e-file. Now, removal of the guard can sometimes happen as an in-between move, at maybe move 2 or 3 in a variation. And so this will work your visualization abilities, because if you calculate rook takes rook, and you just think of trading the rooks, then you'll have missed a big opportunity. So this is why it's important, and an important point to make, is that when you're evaluating candidate moves, you're going to be doing it at every turn in a variation. And this is why I've been doing it with simple positions, so that you can practice finding all the possibilities and speed it up pretty much. Eventually it will become automatic, but it does take a lot of practice. So you'll notice that rook takes rook and rook takes rook. You should also evaluate the bishop check here. And you'll see that if bishop checks, then either the king has to move away and we win the rook, or he interposes with the rook and we win it anyway. Maybe rook takes rook is better, because now we have a discovery and we're hitting the knight. But either way, these kinds of moves happen all the time. And so you want to be able to figure out all the candidates when you're analyzing a line. And so you should have visualized rook takes rook and then bishop check. Of course, you would still look at rook takes rook. You'd evaluate all the possibilities. But in this position, it's still quite simple because the knight doesn't really have any forcing moves. Bishop only has bishop takes pawn, and that doesn't really lead to anything. The king and the pawns don't really have any forcing moves. So we're pretty much just left with the rook move initially, and then rook move and bishop move. Alright, this has been day 8. I just want to thank you for watching. Leave a comment, let me know what you think. I just want to remind you to use the 4-part thought process when you're doing this, which is basically analyzing the opponent's threats, and then finding your candidates, and then calculating those candidates till the end, and then once you've done that, do a blunder check. So that's what we're training here. Of course, I know it can be tedious, but once you do it enough, and that's what I'm trying to do with this progressive series, is give you lots of practice so that once you do it, it becomes second nature. And from there, you can move on to more complicated positions because you'll have the base fundamental skills to develop it further. All right, thanks for watching and have a good day.